The program says that I'm going to talk about disruptions, and I am, but I thought, who wants to talk about MOOCs and competency-based learning just as MOOCs and competency-based learning? So I want to take you on a trip down memory lane. I know, and this is the beginning of my 41st year as a professional in higher ed. I was 4 when I started, and have kind of been running ever since. But do you remember when you went to college and everybody on the faculty was Dr. Somebody? You know, I mean, they were next to God. You just were in awe. And I still have faculty members that I cannot call by their first names, you know, because they were just Dr. Schmidt and Dr. Taggart. They lectured, didn't have to stand behind a podium because they were just so knowledgeable. I didn't realize until much later it's because they had taught that class for so long they could just roll it off their head. But you know, very impressed when they first began. They were those sages on the stage. They just could answer every question that you ask. They weren't very technologically savvy. We were still doing overhead projectors at that particular point. Remember the transparencies and, yeah, okay, that's all right. Or the 16 millimeter projectors. I learned to splice film, that would break all the time doing that. They actually, though, it was the first time, for me anyway, that my teachers asked what I thought about something. You know, my opinion really mattered at that particular point. And as I became a teacher, it was amazing to me that students would look at the floor. It's kind of like, don't call on me, please. I just don't want to know. But, you know, we were very eager to share our opinions and tell people what we were thinking. And the fact that somebody asked was even great. They would even eat lunch with us. And as you moved up to junior and senior seminars, they would go to the bar with you after night class, or sometimes whole class at the bar, if you were lucky. But the thing that was most impressive was that they expected we were all going to learn. We were all going to perform. They had high expectations of us. Part of that was because we were in selective admission institutions and we were all smart. So they figured if you're smart, then we expect that you're going to perform. We didn't have the same kind of diversity among the students as we do today. Students were prepared academically to go to college. We had all taken that college curriculum in high school, to prepare us to be able to get there. We had created study groups because we knew that there was safety in numbers, first of all, but that it was also an opportunity to learn from each other. We, however, were self-directed. We didn't need anybody to tell us how to study because that's how we had survived K-12 education, was learning how to learn. The best part about it was most of the classmates were male. And this was right after the generation in which my mother was, where the purpose of her going to college was to find a husband in the first place. Okay, I mean, literally, my grandmother was very upset with her because she went to Fisk University in Nashville, which was right down the street from Meharry Medical College, and when she didn't come home with a doctor, my grandmother was very distressed. She said, what do you think I sent you there for? Well, my generation kind of moved beyond that. I was in that 60s, 70s generation where women were empowered and we could do what we wanted to do, but it was cool to be able to go to class with all the men. Today, faculty are more facilitators of learning. There's a lot less lecturing and more discussing that's going on. Flipping college classrooms now, where students get the lectures or read the lectures before they come to class and have an opportunity to discuss the information and the implications of what it was that they learned. Faculty are being asked to develop specific student learning outcomes. What is it you expect a student to be able to do once they leave your class or your program? You ought to know that. I went through a whole bunch of classes where I never knew what was there. Even my son went through high school, and he came home, I remember, from Algebra 2. Why do I have to learn all these formulas? I'm never going to use these formulas again. And I said, Reggie, you probably won't. But the process that you use to learn to solve for that unknown is something that you will use throughout your whole life. Well, why didn't they tell me that then? It would have made more sense. they have no idea why they're taking a class. It's just required, you have to do it. Now we're asking college faculty to identify those specific outcomes. And it is because of that requirement that competency-based education is now flowing into, if I can tell you what you need to know and you already know how to do it, then just demonstrate that you know how to do it and you don't have to sit in a class. Okay? We are much more technologically savvy than we have been, or at least you all are as faculty members. I can't claim that all the time. Although I put music on my phone and my son was distressed that I learned how to do that before he did. I felt really good since the 20-somethings and teen-somethings think they invented technology and they can do it all. But when you look at how we have gone from those overhead projectors to 16-millimeter projectors to VHS and beta tapes, to cassette tapes, to CD-ROM. I mean, we have come in the 40 years I've been in the business a very long way technologically that we never would have thought would have happened in such a short period of time. And so now with social media and with iPods starting it, being able to leave lecture material available for students so that as they're working, as they're traveling to and from school, as they're on debate teams and athletic teams and choirs where they have to miss a lecture, there is no excuse for them doing that anymore. That has created an entire new opportunity for faculty members, some of whom are kicking and screaming, taking advantage of those opportunities because I don't want to learn all that stuff. I'm too old. I may erase something or whatever. You've heard all of those excuses. But the reality is the internet has changed things. I was president of a community college in Lynchburg, Virginia, when the library changed over from the card catalog to the databases, and we literally had a moment of silence as they rolled the card catalogs out because that was a revolutionary kind of thing. I mean, we actually, I tell high school and college students all the time, you don't understand the pain involved in having to walk into a building, go through these cards, write down the Dewey Decimal System number, and then walk into the stacks and find the book, and then get all upset because it's not there. I mean, you can just click and information is right at your fingertips now. You don't understand what research is all about because it has taken on an entirely new concept and way of doing things. Our expectations are somewhat different, and it's largely, I think, because we do have such a heterogeneous level of academic preparation in our classrooms. And so faculty members have gotten more and more frustrated with the fact that many more of their students are not meeting the expectations of student performance. The problem with that is that we need them to care, and we need them to become more actively involved in their students' lives because we need more and more students to complete. We've been very focused as a nation on access to higher ed. Now we're having to focus on, rightfully so I think, the success of those students. Getting them in is one thing, getting them out with some kind of credential is something else. The students are largely from academically underprepared areas more and more every day. In 2013, the classrooms were mostly female. It is not unusual to go to a college campus and at least 55% of the student body is female. Very different than it was 45, 50 years ago. They're largely adults. One of the challenges that I get to have with meeting with the Department of Ed and folks in Congress is they are still fixated on the traditional college-age student. And they are developing policies for 18 to 21-year-olds, when the reality is 75% of students today are over 25. 75%. Dormitories are not an issue anymore. I mean, they're not. Classrooms are not as big an issue anymore. We're talking distance instruction for folks who are working and have to catch a break at 4 o'clock in the morning when the house is very quiet before everybody gets up to be able to finish a lecture. And either they don't want to know that or they're just not understanding that. Also, we have a larger minority population than ever before coming to college. You know, I tell folks, I am Catholic, and if it weren't for the Catholic Church, we wouldn't have as many minority students coming in because the Hispanic population, which is largely Catholic, continues to have babies. I mean, seriously. Okay, and whether, you know, Sarita Brown is the president of an organization called Excelencia in Education, which is kind of the go-to group in Washington, D.C. for information regarding Latinos in higher education. And she spoke at our annual meeting a couple of years ago and had a statistic that just blew me away. She said, when you look at today's population, there is one 18 to 25-year-old Anglo-Saxon Protestant, if you will, to replace everyone who is 65 or older. When you look at the Hispanic population, there are 15 Hispanics between 18 and 25 for every one who is 65 or older. That's major. And that is a cultural shift coming into our colleges unlike any we've ever seen before, because there's a language barrier. Even when they're born in this country, there is still sometimes a language barrier because they've spoken Spanish at home. They are more often than not the first in their family to ever go to college. So they don't have the support at home to know what they're supposed to be doing in college or how to prepare for college. Many of them did not take the academic college prep curriculum, so they're coming in academically underprepared, and they aren't comfortable filling out FAFSA forms because they don't want you to know how much money they don't have, and they don't believe in a handout. They want to work for what they have. And so they don't understand that there are scholarships available, there are grants available that don't have to be paid back. So it's a whole new recruitment effort for the folks in your institutions that are doing recruitment. Almost an uphill battle for some. So the student population is just moving very differently than it ever was before. But they're still much more technologically savvy than we were when we were college students. I remember high tech for us was the Princess telephone. You remember that? Hey, we had arrived when that happened. But with YouTube and Instagram and Facebook, and it's interesting because it is those young 18 to 25-year-olds who invented Facebook. But now it's those of us over 40 who have taken it over. So therefore, they have now developed Instagram. I tell them, you better hurry up and think of something else because we're coming on your tails, trying to take that one over as well. The problem with this population today, this traditional population and even older students, is it's taking them longer to finish college. The numbers between, I'm on Lumina Foundation board, and we have Goal 2025 that is trying to get 60% of the adult population to have a credential of some sort beyond high school, but in that age group. And right now we're at about 39%. Well, 2025 is now but 11 years away. That's a lofty goal to try to increase the graduation rate by that many. That's why you see so many colleges and even the Georgia program of reclaiming students who may be 3, 6, 9, 12 hours from graduating to try to get them to come back. Or the reverse transfer programs where students had attended a community college, transferred to a senior institution. I don't call them four-year colleges because so few people graduate in 4 years anymore. But senior institution, and yet they'll take their credits that they earned at the senior institution back over to the community college so that they can be awarded an associate's degree as a result of that. Because we're trying to do everything we can to increase those numbers. Now, why is all this important? Well, because we have an expanded global competitiveness going on here. We are, our American companies are doing business in foreign countries. And it's sometimes cheaper to hire the labor of the company, the other country rather, than our own citizens. And so a lot of the jobs have been going overseas. When the technology revolution came in, it changed jobs. It made them so much easier, so many different ways to do things. But we weren't aware of how many jobs it was going to eliminate. That people had been able to make a good living with just a strong back, and a willingness to put in the time and effort. So those innovations in technology have changed things. We don't have those card catalogs anymore to have to take time to learn stuff. We can just have instant information on the tip of our fingers. My generation didn't have as many children as my mother's generation did, and so we have fewer people coming into the workforce. On top of that, the jobs that are available now not only are more technologically advanced, but they're requiring more higher order thinking skills of the people who are moving into those jobs. Go back and look at the Dictionary of Occupational Titles that was there forever. There are jobs out there that didn't exist even 5 years ago, let alone 45 years ago when we graduated or entered college. We're preparing students for careers that have not been invented yet. I was sharing a minute ago that I went over to SCAD. Those of you who live here know about the Savannah College of Art and Design. It's a wonderful facility. They have their QEP, which is required by our organization to show something that increases student learning. I will never think of the QEP the same again, nor will I ever look at a parking space the same again, because they have built pods in which to live the size of a parking lot. And it is phenomenal. I mean, it's got a toilet and a sink and a place to cook and a bed and a place to sit. I mean, it's like a dormitory room, a little bit larger, in a parking space. And they started with looking at the fact that our country has overbuilt parking decks. In large metropolitan areas, we have many more parking decks than we really need. And so what do you do with them? You're going to tear them down? Well, that's kind of a waste. Plus, you've got a bunch of college students who can't afford to buy a house. And you don't want them back at your house. So they got to go somewhere. So if they can't afford to buy a house and they have to go somewhere, let's look at this, way for them to live and to form communities in parking decks. It is phenomenal. And their interior design students got together and their architecture students, and it is just amazing, what is going on. So, and there are no light switches anywhere in there. Everything is computer generated. I mean, it's just absolutely phenomenal. So some of the careers and some of the academic majors at SCAD did not exist, years ago. So how we're preparing students is phenomenal. We are really flying by the seat of their pants. So what does that mean for tomorrow? Well, it means that actually we're going to need fewer faculty. Which the good news about that is we have fewer people wanting to go into faculty positions anyway. So we better figure out a way to survive, with a fewer number. If you've been involved in a search for faculty, you will notice that the number of applicants has decreased considerably over even 10 years ago when everybody wanted to come and be a college faculty member because there's so many jobs that pay so much better. People are delaying their teaching careers to go out and make a little money and then come back and live the poor life of a faculty member. Many of them are bringing many more life experiences to the classroom than we brought. We went from a graduate school graduation on Friday to a college professorship, the following Monday. I mean, that was kind of what we did. And nowadays, people are taking detours before that. Our faculty, if the student body today is mostly female, stands to reason that we're going to have more female faculty. College faculty have been a male-dominated profession for a very long time. I never had one female faculty member in college. Not one. And yet now there are whole bunches of them. There's less direct contact with students. We have many more students in online classes. Distance learning has taken on, or in the competency-based programs that are now coming forward to, where you don't have to go to class anymore. You just go take a test or present a portfolio and show that you have that knowledge already. And so we don't need as many faculty members to do this stuff. We have an increased number of applied courses that will have, because again, while getting a job has always been an outcome of higher education, people didn't tell us that that was why we were going to college. We were going to college, for the public good. We were going to make a difference in the world. Our parents were the ones who were saying, "And you're going to get a job because you're not coming back home after I've spent all this money." But that was not the primary goal for attending college. Today, that's all you hear. I want to get a job. What can I major in that will allow me to get a job quick, fast, and in a hurry and make a lot of money? And so we're going to have more and more courses that are directly related to job training. Even in our prestigious senior institutions, they're finding ways to turn traditional programs into applied programs. Service learning started that, I think, by getting students to volunteer in areas where they could see and implement the things they had learned in a class. Nowadays, that's an integral required part of a lot of classes so that you can do some on-the-job training while you're still in that class, and it makes more sense. And of course, there is a stronger emphasis on accountability and student learning outcomes. It's interesting because Margaret Spellings, when she was Secretary of Ed for President Bush, was the one who began this conversation in earnest about college accountability and student learning outcomes. And everybody was saying, well, when that administration's over, then we can sit back. Well, this administration has gone on steroids to outcomes and accountability. And it's not going away. It is not going away. Every time they do a survey, they credit, I'll say credit rather than blame, but credit accreditors with pushing student learning outcomes. And that is where the impetus has come for a lot of it. And the good news for me, I think, is that this region has been leading the way of all the other regions in student learning outcomes. We've been requiring that of you all since the 80s. And some of the other regions are just getting on board with it, and they're having the same kinds of learning pains that you all had back in the 80s. But it's not going away. They want to know, what am I getting for my money? When you look at the federal financial aid budget, that's over $1 trillion, they want to know, what am I paying for? What am I getting? And they're demanding that we get employable people to keep this country moving forward. The students are going to still be largely minority. They'll be mostly female, but they're going to be 18 to 45 as freshmen and not just 18, 19, and 20. Because you have so many returning students, people who postponed a college career to go out and work or to raise a family, who now have time and a little money to be able to come back, or people who've been in the workforce and now they're having to retrain because their job has either been eliminated or has been expanded and changed so much that they have to learn something anew. They're still struggling academically for all the reasons that we said before, but also because they don't have a lot of time to put into homework because they're trying to work and raise a family while still going to school. It's going to be a shift because they are working and raising a family. They're going to be more often part-time. And we don't know how to build schedules for part-time students in a lot of our institutions. We don't know how to build schedules for adult students in a lot of our institutions because forever we've been dealing with the 18 to 21-year-old. I've seen a lot of senior institutions have adult programs that for some reason are separate from their regular college classes. It's like, I don't want to mix the two, the older folks and the younger folks. Oh my goodness, there was a novel concept there. But we have to educate them differently, and the reality is those learning styles can bleed over into all ages of students and be able to bring benefits. First class I ever taught was a developmental psychology course. It was really their personal growth and development course. I used to call it a tell me what you want to be when you grow up and I'll help you get there kind of course. And when I walked in the room, I was 22 years old, right out of graduate school. People looking at me like, who is this woman? They thought I was a student assistant coming in to tell them the faculty member wasn't going to show up. And I had a guy 62 years old in my class, and I'm going, what can I teach him? He's much older than I. He's my age now then. It's like, what can I teach this man? But it was great because he was able to bring so much to the classroom that the students really rallied around him and always cherished his opinion. So to segregate students based on age makes absolutely no sense to me. Again, there's going to be a focus on employability skills. And you hear businesses and industries making many more demands upon traditional higher education to prepare students for work. It's like, I don't really care as much if they have the technical skills. I want them to have the team building skills and the report writing skills and the customer service skills. I can teach them how to do a CNC lathe or whatever it is that the technical skill is, but I need you to send me that well-rounded, educated person that higher ed has always claimed to produce in the first place. There will be a greater participation in online courses, and with that comes more accountability. The reason you all now have the requirement of authenticating students who enroll in distance learning courses is because of the ability of students to get somebody else to do their work when the other person is smarter than they are. And again, federal government saying, I'm putting out all this money for student financial aid. That's fraud. If you register for a course, I give you the financial aid, but somebody else is taking the class. So with the growth of online learning, whether it's MOOCs or anything else, also comes security issues and other kinds of things that impact what it is that we do every day. So what can colleges do to respond to this? Well, you can guide more students into non-traditional majors so that they'll go into non-traditional jobs. Again, if the majority of students are going to be female, we're going to help them feel comfortable being automotive repairmen and engineers and architects, which are careers that have traditionally been male-dominated careers. Many students don't understand, too, if they're really going to college looking for a job, some of those technical skill jobs pay a whole bunch of money. That's really what I should have been looking at for retirement. My son was excited about automotive technology when he was in high school, and I'm thinking, this is really great, because in Northern Virginia, they were paying automotive technicians $90,000 with an associate's degree. And I'm going, this is cool. Reggie, however many tools you need, sweetie, mommy will buy, not a problem. Of course, he changed his major to history, which didn't make me feel real good, but they don't understand. Parents don't understand it, students don't understand it. They still have this traditional mindset about a lot of jobs that just really don't exist anymore. I mean, because has anybody had their car repaired lately? You don't get your car fixed anymore. You get a circuit breaker replaced. You get a computer chip replaced because everything in it is computer driven. They take the fob, you don't even have a key for your car anymore. They take the fob and put it in the computer and read out everything that's going on in your car. What happened to pulling into this greasy garage where oil was everywhere and all the tools and people had to have a strong back and know what they were doing? Jobs have changed, and we haven't told people that all the time. We need to work with minority students while they're still in the K-12 system. I was in Virginia, and we created an adopt a high school, middle school, elementary school system with our colleges and universities so that they could help students understand why they were taking that Algebra 2, for example, before they got in the class, so they could understand the connection between what was going on. We still have so many students who are in developmental ed right out of high school because high schools think that this is the level of academic performance a student needs, and we think it's up here, and we don't tell them that. We will never get rid of developmental ed until we start communicating with our K-12 colleagues to let them know what our expectations are. Don't misunderstand, I think we'll always have a need for developmental ed because when old farts like me decide to go back to school, I'm going to need to be remediated in some of those areas. But as a general proposition, we should not have as many students coming from high school into developmental courses. We need to better communicate with them while they're still in high school so that they can understand what being college ready means. Develop strategies that ensure students will matriculate through college to graduation. To graduation, not just let them in, but make sure that they're leaving us with some kind of academic credential. And it's okay to link courses thematically. You know, it really is okay for a student to do one term paper that will take care of 2 classes. And if faculty members look at me and say, you've lost your mind when I say that. But it really is okay to do that kind of programming. There's nothing to preclude that. We certainly don't step on your toes, you know, fine. As long as you can prove that the faculty who are teaching are qualified, we don't care how you link them together. We had a speaker at our summer institute one summer who was talking about accountability and how in student services, oftentimes you do the assessment of your effectiveness by surveys. You go to the library, they ask, you know, what was your service like? You go to admissions and records, you know, did we meet your needs today? How about an English faculty member who assigns a paper on explain your registration process to me? You'd get a lot more information. You may not want it, but you'll get a lot more information, and the teacher teaching English will be able to read something other than what I did on my summer vacation. You know, and you'll be able to make changes based on that. And, you know, I sat there and went, I mean, that was a VA moment. Why would I never think of that? It never dawned on me when I was dean of students or campus provost or president to ask the faculty to put in assignments that were somehow related to the student support area. Just never did. So it's okay, let alone getting English faculty to talk to biology faculty to talk to, I mean, that was, you know, never heard of. Promote service learning. This generation of students, and even those who are adults, learn a lot better when it makes sense, when it's not an abstract phenomenon out there, okay? And so if you can do some on-the-job training or have some service learning programs. Well, one of the institutions at which I worked, we had a nursing program that had we had a mobile health care van that would go out into some of the communities because there were a lot of communities where low-income folks didn't have access to health care. And so it allowed the students to be able to, you know, check blood pressure and draw blood and, you know, do all that kind of stuff. And so one of their service learning projects was to develop a patient intake form, for lack of a better phrase, in the language of the people they were visiting. I mean, think about going to a community, it's largely Ethiopian, for example, where they don't speak English, and say, all right, fill this out and give me all the information about you. They can't read the form, they don't know what you're asking. So if you can have the form in their language, it goes a lot quicker and makes them feel a lot more comfortable with the service that's being provided. So those are practical kinds of things that will help folks get ready for the workforce. Identify those expected learning outcomes. Assess how students are doing regularly and assure that there are support services to enhance that curriculum. Provide instructional options for students. Make changes to the curriculum and delivery of instruction, hence the competency-based instruction and the direct assessment programs, which in our minds at the accrediting agencies are two different things. They're related, but they are two different things. When you come to us with a competency-based instruction model, what you're saying is that some of your courses, because most of the prospecti that have come to us have been a hybrid model, they've been able to take some courses that lend themselves to skill development and say, here are the outcomes that we expect. General education's a little more difficult, you know, in history and biology and stuff. It's easier in automotive tech and nursing and teacher ed, I guess. But we want to make sure that it fits into your mission, you know, that somehow you can talk about dealing with adult students or you know, with distance learning or whatever it is that you're doing, that it is related to your mission. That information is provided to students, clearly understood information so that they can know exactly what they're getting into. That the structure of the program is coherent. Okay? The area that's providing the most difficulty is trying to develop a transcript that people who go to institutions that are still traditional institutions can understand what those courses were and what the competencies were to give them equivalent credit at the transfer in institution. That's been the biggest challenge. But to make sure that you've got standards of admission and eligibility. Everybody shouldn't be eligible to go into a competency-based program any more than they should any other academic program that you have. What is the assessment of the program and the student learning that you have? How do you know? I had to talk to a legislator. Wow, this is wonderful because we won't need as many faculty. Who's going to develop the competencies? Who's going to develop the assessment? Who's going to sit there and evaluate whether the student has met them or not? Those are still the roles that we expect faculty to have, whether they're sitting in a 3-hour class or sitting in their office, you know, grading portfolios. And who are those faculty and what qualifies them to be able to work in this environment. And what is the institutional responsibility for awarding the credentials? So we're still looking at programs in a similar light, but there are some nuances to a competency-based program. A direct assessment program is the one where it's totally competency-based, like Southern New Hampshire University has, where a student doesn't have to take any classes. It's all competencies. And that right now for them has been an associate's degree that's directly related to McDonald's, because they worked with the folks at McDonald's to see what were the skill sets they wanted students to have to be able to work effectively in management at McDonald's. So it's not a generic program yet, but the model is growing like topsy. What is the other things that we review when you submit a competency-based instructional model to us? What is the application of academic policies? Do you have to make changes on attendance? Of course you do. On whatever requirements you have of a student. Is there a residency requirement? And if so, how do you accomplish that when they don't have to go to class? All of those kinds of things have to be reviewed. The acceptance and awarding of credit. Again, that's the biggest, the one with which institutions have the greatest amount of difficulty is translating for institutions that aren't offering competency-based programs. What is it that this student has earned in terms of an academic unit? Are there contractual agreements? Is there some other entity that's offering the class or the program? Is the MOOC coming from someplace else? Or does Straighter Line have a class that students can take? And if so, how can you determine the quality of those programs well enough to know whether to accept them for credit or not? What do the student support services change at all? Or is there access to the library or to computer center that's different for students who are coming through a program that's competency-based? And what are the fees that are associated with it? And how do you charge tuition when you're not sitting in a 3-hour or 4-hour class? All of those are issues that have to be considered when you're bringing it in. But we are ready as an agency to help you all work through that. This is the digital generation, as we said. They prefer technology to face-to-face contact. They do have attention issues. This is the TV generation. They're used to 6 minutes of lecture and then a commercial. I mean, think about it. So when you're planning a lecture for a group, you've got to build in some stretch time or some, ask them a question kind of thing, because otherwise you will lose their attention or they'll start writing on their computers. Writing papers is very different. We already talked about the library. I mean, you can buy a paper on any topic that there is. So now you're having to get software to check whether this is original work or whether somebody else did it already. Trying to understand students, because again, the focus is different. They want to make money. That is the primary goal of college students today. They are overstimulated and they're constantly engaged. And I mean, they all have ADD. Nowadays, they can't keep still, because they're just going all the time. They are feeling very highly stressed, which is very different, and for very different reasons than we did, I think, when we were in school. Many of them are stressed because they have jobs and families, and they're trying to go to school, which is, for community colleges, is probably more the norm, because they have been educating adult students for a lot longer, I think. But, students all over the place. Who are even traditional age students who are going to senior institutions still feel very, very stressed. And they're not thinking about tomorrow. They're trying to get through a semester or a course even in some cases. And so they haven't put the package together. That's not all that different from us, though, I have to say. We were trying to get from semester to semester too. Institutions then need to educate their staff as to how to deal with all of this. This is the first time in our history that we have had multiple generations in a single classroom. That's different, and it demands a different teaching style. It demands a different set of expectations on the part of students. It changes the way you do business. The activities are in the classroom have to be generationally different. I remember in that developmental psych class, one of the activities I had the students do, because it was a career exploration kind of course too, was to write a paper about their career choice, talking about salary and the work environment stuff, but also to go interview someone who was already in the job. Because so many times students grow up, I want to be a doctor, I want to be a nurse, I want to be a teacher. They have no idea what that job does. They just know that this is a well-respected kind of career and I want to go into it. Had this one woman ask me if she wanted to be a hooker, could she bring a hooker to class? And I said, you know, while prostitution is indeed a lucrative profession, it is still illegal, so I would prefer that you not. You know, you had to be there, I guess, but there are different expectations of students at different ages. Someone 45 probably would not have asked that question. They've probably already known the answer, but nonetheless, the activities that you have often will have to be varied because of the generational differences within the classroom. Identifying expected outcomes for faculty and students. You know, letting faculty know, there was an article in one of the online rags, either the Chronicle or Inside Higher Ed yesterday, that talked about the fact that those institutions that are giving, bless you, all this emphasis on research for faculties to be promoted also need to give credibility for teaching. There's a novel concept, you know, because that's not the way the U.S. News and World Report has evaluated institutions, and you know that's not what gets you the upper echelon status. You know, it's more the emphasis on research. And the reality is, we're much more teaching institutions than we are research institutions all across this country. And so why aren't we giving folks credit for improving student learning or increasing the number of students who are completing with some kind of credential? We have to let faculty and students, though, know what the expected outcomes are. If we expect that we're going to increase the completion rate in our institutions by 20%, faculty need to know what their role is in that. I would think that they're 100% in there, since they're the ones that control whether students finish or not. So, but you have to tell them that up front. We need to encourage assessment of activities. We still have faculty who are kicking and screaming about doing assessment outside of the regular tests that they give. Trying to get many of them to understand that we're talking programmatically, how does your course fit into this program, and programmatically, how do your outcomes fit into the overall program outcomes. So we've got to encourage that, and then use the data to make the changes in the institutions. Faculty are taking votes of no confidence on presidents all over the country, because presidents are starting to hold their feet to the fire and saying, you've been here 25 years, you've graduated 6 students, you know, is your program really relevant? I mean, seriously, having to make those kinds of decisions when budgets are tight and businesses are clamoring for people to be prepared to go into their fields when you're offering stuff that is outdated. Being able to do that, you have to be able to do that. So times they are a-changing. There is absolutely no doubt about that. But I think it's an exciting time. I think to see so many of my peers going back to school. It's why I wanted to go back to school. I didn't want a law degree, I didn't want an MBA, but a bartender's license just sounds really cool. So I'll let you know at what corner I end up so that you all can come on down. Thank you very much. Can we take questions? If you have questions, I'll try to answer them.
Thank you for a wonderful presentation.
Thank you.
Just wanted to find out if SACS has considered how international students and the demand from foreign countries for American education impacts this whole model and overview that you presented.
We are involved with international institutions in 2 ways. Number one, we have institutions that are indigenous to other countries come to us to be accredited. There is, as much as we complain about the accreditation system, there are other countries who clamor for it. They think that we're, you know, the best. And I always ask them, I say, you know, you have a choice of 6 different accrediting bodies. Why in the world are you coming to us when everybody thinks that we're the hardest nose of all the accreditors? And the response I get invariably is because if you are the toughest, we want to go through the best so that nobody questions the quality of our instruction. We also work with other countries through our own institutions who have campuses in other parts of the world. And so there is a spillover, if you will, into what those other countries are starting to think about the quality movement based on our own institutions doing business over there. I get visitors all the time from governments in other countries that are coming over trying to figure out how is it that we are this successful in attaining such a high quality educational system when the government in this country doesn't control it. Because in other countries, it is the government that controls, everything, including higher education. Boy, if our government controlled us, I would hesitate to think on some days what we would look like. But, the fact that we are independent, we're over 3,000 independent institutions, that are able, with a variety of missions that offer something for everybody. And it's not a one lockstep kind of system, over the whole country. So that's how we're engaged in it at this particular point. We have Monterrey Tech, which has a longer name than that, that has been accredited with us since 1952, which is longer than some of our own domestic institutions, because the president at that time figured that he wanted students in Mexico to be able to transfer and get jobs in our country, and they could only do that if they had that good housekeeping stamp of approval from the regional accrediting agency. So we're there. If there are other ways in which you think we could be involved, by all means, let me know. Okay.
I was also kind of more interested in the kind of demand, a billion Chinese, a billion Indians, a billion Arabs wanting to come to the U.S. for that kind of education that they know we are good at providing in that brick and mortar institutions, and whether that is impacting how we are looking at some of the new things that you just presented us today.
It's not impacting how we're looking at it, but it's definitely impacting what institutions are doing to respond to them. A lot of institutions that had never recruited international students before are beginning to have active recruitment fairs in other countries because the 18 to 21 population here has shrunk. You don't have to be creative, this is okay, but if you are, here's one up here.
Dr. Whalen is another one of those that's in the 29 and holding group. You're looking pretty good. With the advent of the competency-based output model that we're seeing, we've seen a lot of failures in that. The Atlanta school system, where it was teach the test, that is still going on. The VA current thing that's going on is basically competency-based. What is SACS doing to ensure that the colleges that you accredit aren't going to fall into that same trap? Because in Georgia, the funding model is the more you crank out the back, the more money you get instead of being on the front end.
Yeah.
So how are you going to ensure that pass-fail creep doesn't come into these colleges in the competition for funds in the future?
Well, I'm not sure that we can ensure that any more than I can a traditional classroom is not suddenly giving grades, across the board. That's why you have boards of trustees who look at each individual institution. What we're trying to do is to make sure that the structure and the processes are in place on the front end that would at least put on the minds of all the people who are developing this that we're still concerned about the coherence of the academic program and how this fits. We're still concerned that that there are outcomes for these particular competencies, just as we're concerned that they are available in the regular 3 and 4 and 5 hour courses that come along, that we still care that the faculty know what they're doing, that they're qualified to be able to work in this new model, just as we do when they're in whatever traditional classroom setting or online setting in which they're already teaching. So we're looking still at the structure and the expected outcomes. We're asking you to assess the data, to see that a student, you identified these outcomes and you've got this assessment, whether it's a portfolio or a test or writing a musical score or whatever it is, to make sure that the students are still learning what they are, and then if they're not, then to make changes in that assessment and that instruction to do it. So it's a shift of delivery, but for us, it's not a shift of quality. We're expecting that the same elements that are involved in a traditional program are still going to be available in that competency-based model. We also don't have many schools that have come up with those proposals because it's tough to translate a 3-hour class into a list of competencies. I mean, it is really tough, and it's even tougher to assess, whether they've met those competencies or not. So you don't see a whole bunch of faculty chomping at the bit to jump out there and do that. But we've had about 5. And I think even across the country, you haven't seen that many. So, because it is hard work. And so I think as it becomes, as faculty start talking to each other across the country and realize that this is what it's going to take, and if you're willing to do that, then you can be successful, then we'll see more and more of them. But we're not flooded with them right this minute. We're flooded with mergers.
One more back here.
Yeah.
Oh, hi.
Hi.
Great presentation. I just wanted to make a comment. I know you mentioned with SACS and just you look at highly qualified instructors, and a lot of your presentation was based on just the change in demographics that we have. And I know one of the concerns I have is just people really embracing like just the change in demographics. And so I think about how the populations that are coming through the pipeline, just based on the demographics, based on poverty, that they're the most difficult a lot of times to get through the pipeline to educate. And then we look at a lot of the faculty members who may not be as relatable to some of those populations, just for a lot of different reasons. And I just think about how even I recently went through a program, and some of the concerns I had is when the teachers would say things like they were never really addressed by the faculty members, the professor, on just some of the biases they have. And I'm like concerned that these are the people who are going to go into the classrooms, they're going to be instructing these students, and they may not have, their perspective in mind.
The sensitivity to it.
The sensitivity, yeah. So when I think about highly qualified and just the way you all label that, like, are there different things that are being looked at to say, who do we have that's going to really have the compassion, who's going to really be able to take these students and help them get through the pipeline? Because that's a concern I had. Not just do you have these teaching competencies, can you teach this, but can you literally teach this population?
I understand.
Because I feel like you can't really adequately educate somebody that you don't respect, that you fear, or that you have pity for.
Great points. Can't argue with all of them. I can provide a different perspective. Having grown up in a very integrated situation and coming through in the 60s, where in high school I was the only black, because we were still black then. My grandmother was colored, my mother was Negro, I'm black, and my son's African American, so it's hard to tell. But growing up in a time where we were just becoming black, we had gone from being Negroes to being black, and we were proud, and we were wearing hair out to here, and we were holding up fists, and we had people who were not looking at us like, whoa, what is going on? But had it not been for the whites of goodwill, I certainly would not have been able to achieve the successes that I have. So I don't want to write off the population just because they don't look like me. But they do need to be sensitive. As a matter of fact, I commented earlier that this is a very white group in this room. When you consider, the demographics of the students who are coming through, and there is definitely going to have to be a transition among faculty who are working with this academically different and socially different population to ensure that, that they understand with what they're dealing. Do we assess that? No, we do not. Should institutions do? You bet your bippy they ought to. I don't know how to do that, however, except through your faculty evaluations and somehow in your post-tenure review systems, to ensure, and looking at the data to see how many minority students you had coming in and how many you had going out, and at what point do they leave and why. So those are institutional decisions that we do indeed leave to the institution. But you're right, that needs to be on every hiring supervisor's mind. They don't have to look exactly like that student, but they do have to understand and be sympathetic. I taught with a young woman who taught reading. I worked at a community college, so we still had reading programs at that point. And she came to me very frustrated. And I was one of 2,000 faculty, and only 4 of us were black at that time in this entire community college. And so, you know, when there's only one or two of us in the group, we get to be the spokespersons for the group. If, you know, if you're the only woman, you get to answer all the women questions. If you're the only man, you get to answer all the men questions. I got to answer, most of the black questions. So she came to me and she said, I can't ask anybody else this but you. I have this young black woman that I'm just not getting through to her, and I need some help. And I told her, I said, well, Joanne, you probably are the first white person who has ever legitimately shown an interest in her. And frankly, she don't believe you're real. So if I were you, I would go to her and say, I'm probably the first white person that's ever shown an interest in you, and you don't believe me. When you believe me, you come back, and then I'm going to help you learn how to read. And that's exactly what she did, and that happened. It worked, and she gave me 3 yellow roses to say thank you. You've got to understand the people with whom you're dealing. First of all, your teachers, and teachers in K-12 are caught up so in giving the test and grading the test that they sometimes forget about the students at the other end. They don't live in the same neighborhoods. They have all the stereotypes about, from where these students are coming. And so they've developed this thought process that I can't get through to them sometimes, which is very unfair, but it's very true. Unfortunately, people who look like them, who have risen from that situation, often have that same perception. So that's what I'm saying. It's not just a racial, it's an emotional, I'm an educator kind of phenomenon that I think we need to ensure that our faculty and support staff have, for working with students. But yeah, you're right, and no, SACS COC doesn't. On that happy note, enjoy what's left of your conference.